I knew something was off the second Linda from HR walked into the room holding a branded notepad, like she was about to euthanize a golden retriever. You don't bring HR to a raise meeting unless someone's about to get restructured. Still, I sat down in that beige conference room like a damn idiot, clutching my performance review binder with color-coded tabs and 2 decades of loyalty radiating off me like BO in a server room. My manager, Todd, the human embodiment of a damp paper towel, cleared his throat and said, "We really appreciate everything you've done here, but the leadership team feels it's time to bring in some fresh blood, someone with a more modern perspective." Translation: Your old and my golf buddy's nephew needs a job. Linda chimed in with her cloying therapy voice. "We'd like to offer you a dignified transition period where you can train your replacement. 2 weeks should be sufficient," my mouth said. "Of course, I'm happy to contribute however I can." My brain screamed, "I hope your nephew installs ransomware by accident, Todd." I left the room with a face as calm as a Buddha statue and the internal emotional weather of a Category 5 hurricane. No severance, no bonus, just a weak handshake and the lingering smell of lemon Lysol. 15 years of patching broken APIs with duct tape and prayer. Staying late on Christmas Eve to migrate legacy systems because no one else knew the difference between a hotfix and a brain aneurysm. And now I was a training module for some punk with a sociology degree and a ring light. But I didn't cry. I didn't throw anything. I went back to my desk, opened my bottom drawer, and pulled out the dusty external drive labeled Archive Dead Schemas. Obsolete documentation, deprecated workflows, process maps that were retired back when TikTok was just a Kesha song. I blew off the dust like it was a sacred relic and plugged it in with the reverence of a Catholic lighting a votive candle. I was going to teach this little brat everything, every wrong path, every old rule, every don't do this or the database implodes procedure dressed up like best practices. I was going to weaponize my knowledge like a suburban mom weaponizes guilt. Oh, and hey, if you're still reading this, mind hitting that follow button? I'm chasing my first ever 10,000 subscribers, and honestly, it would mean more to me than Todd's awkward pity smile as he escorted me out with a branded coffee mug and a thanks for your service card signed in ballpoint by people who don't know my last name. Anyway, by the time the new guy showed up, name's Aiden, of course it is, I already had a lesson plan. I was going to make sure he inherited exactly what they asked for, my legacy. The outdated, unstable, barely documented mess I kept together with spit and instinct for 15 godforsaken years. Because they didn't want me, just the surface level knowledge. And like a cursed monkey's paw, I was going to give it to them. He was due Monday. I spent the weekend at home rewriting some of the internal documentation, just subtly enough that a novice wouldn't question it, tweaked a few version control notes, reintroduced some retired command sequences that caused recursive write errors under certain conditions, stuff no one but me would remember because I personally buried those bugs 6 years ago. Come Monday, I'd be the smiling docent on his little tour of digital landmines. And the best part? I was going to do it all with a smile, because this wasn't sabotage, this was training. Aiden breezed in on Monday like he was late to a TED talk about disrupting industries he'd never worked in. He had the smug glow of someone who'd never been told no by anyone who wasn't a barista. Skinny pants, designer sneakers. A self-satisfied smirk that said, "I've read half of the lean startup and I'm here to optimize your entire existence." He strutted up to my cubicle, extended a fist for a bump, and said, "Hey, so you're the OG. I've heard you basically built the whole back end from scratch, huh? Respect." Then, before I could say a word, he plopped down at the empty desk across from me and started hammering on his mechanical keyboard like it owed him money. Day one, and he was already installing plugins I'd banned 5 years ago. I casually asked what version control flow he preferred. He blinked and said, "I usually just commit straight to prod. Keeps things agile, you know." I smiled like a Stepford wife holding back a scream. "Of course, agility's key. Let's get you started with some of our internal documentation." I handed him a printout of the most outdated flowchart in the entire archive, the kind that had deprecated written in red in the corner. He gave it a cursory glance and nodded like a man who just decoded the Rosetta Stone. "Sick," he said. "This is way more straightforward than I expected." Of course it was. Last guy who followed that doc broke the middleware loop so hard the servers thought they were in 1997. By midweek, Aiden was interrupting me during walkthroughs to suggest streamlining our legacy approach and leveraging no-code solutions for CRM elasticity, which is Silicon Valley gibberish, for I don't know how to code, but I follow LinkedIn influencers. Every time he opened his mouth, it was like watching someone put ketchup on sushi. Technically legal, but spiritually offensive. At one point, during a session on data schema propagation, he leaned back in his chair and said, "I don't know, this seems kinda old school, no offense. Just feels like there's a fresher way to do things." I almost replied, "Yes, it's called not screwing up what already works," but instead I just nodded and made a note in my handover notes doc. Accepts obsolete schemas without question. Do not correct. Encourage. Meanwhile, Todd and the VP were practically feeding Aiden peeled grapes. "He's got great instincts," they said. "A real go-getter." I watched as they mistook confidence for competence like it was a goddamn parlor trick. They loved him because he was shiny and new and said words like gamify and synergy without choking on them. And every time he opened his mouth, I could feel my humiliation calcify into something sharper. Not just anger, strategy. I started marking up documents with intentional ambiguity. A flow that looped if you didn't notice the footnote. A false default path buried 2 layers deep in the process map. All technically correct. All approved by him with a casual, yeah, looks fine. By Friday, he told the team he was ready to own the next deployment. Said it with the confidence of a man who's never stayed up all night rolling back a failed update while eating saltines and crying into his coffee. I handed him one last training doc, something I'd named Update Pipeline Final 2, DocX, and smiled sweetly. He didn't even read the title. Just said, cool, I'll integrate this Monday. Thanks for everything. Seriously, your groundwork made this all so easy. I bet it did, sweetheart. I bet it did. Let the countdown begin. We settled into a rhythm that second week, a symphony of bad decisions conducted by arrogance and played on the rusted strings of my so-called legacy systems. Aiden came in every day with the same cocky strut, sipping some artisan iced coffee that probably cost more than my lunch, ready to absorb just enough to be dangerous. I gave him everything he asked for, and I mean everything. Old password rotation schedules, outdated API endpoints, retired cron jobs with known race conditions. He devoured it all like it was gospel. Never questioned a single thing, just nodded along and typed loudly like he was racing a ghost. And every time he said got it, I added another mental tally mark under future regrets. During one walkthrough, I guided him through a schema diagram that hadn't been touched since our failed 2016 migration. There was a note in bold that read, "Caution, do not call field map alpha outside legacy wrap block." I pointed to it and said, "Just so you know, this is one of our older internal docs. Some things might be outdated, use with caution." He waved it off. "No worries, I'll clean it all up later. I'm planning to modernize the whole deployment anyway." "Sure, bud, clean it up like a toddler with a Sharpie and a white couch." He started telling the other devs that he was planning to roll out next-gen enhancements to the CRM pipeline. "The old system's bloated," he told them. "I'm gonna streamline everything." Translation: he was about to take a sledgehammer to a house held together by custom scripts, hard-earned paranoia, and my 15 years of experience dodging tech debt like landmines. And speaking of landmines, I'd planted one. A very specific one. In a doc labeled Deploy Trigger Sequence 7C Archive DocX, a relic of our pre-microservice architecture days. The final page included a now-defunct script call that would, under certain circumstances, misalign data indexes during an auto push. Not enough to fail instantly, just enough to pass tests, then slowly erode integrity across all customer records. A bug path I'd patched long ago and tucked away like a cursed artifact in a sealed tomb. I saw his eyes light up when he skimmed it. "Oh, this looks way more direct than the current flow," he said. "Why aren't we using this one?" I shrugged, all innocent. "Internal politics, you know how it goes. Technically still valid if you follow the dependencies." He grinned, "Bet. I'm gonna test this on Monday. Should simplify things by like a lot." I smiled, "Be my guest." I spent my last few days reinforcing the narrative, telling everyone how quick he was picking things up, how eager, how efficient. I even faked a little awe. "He's definitely bringing a fresh perspective," I said to the QA lead, who looked like she was 2 espresso shots away from crying. "I'm sure he'll push us into a whole new era." Behind the scenes, I watched him stumble through the system like a kid with a map to a minefield and a pogo stick. He had no clue what anything meant, he just knew how to deploy. And deploying is sexy, until it breaks something no one else remembers how to fix. On my final Thursday, he clapped me on the back and said, "Thanks again for showing me all this. Genuinely, I know it's awkward, but you've handled this like a total pro." I nodded, suppressing the grin trying to crawl up my face. Of course, I'm always happy to support the transition. He had no idea what he'd inherited. Not knowledge, not wisdom. Just a time bomb with a glowing green button labeled Optimize. They gave me cupcakes. Store-bought, of course, sweaty in their plastic clamshell like they'd been panic purchased from the Safeway clearance rack. Half-iced, half-assed, arranged around a napkin that said good luck. In Comic Sans. Todd stood up awkwardly, holding a paper plate like it was radioactive. "We just want to say you've been a rock." "Really? A pillar?" He couldn't look me in the eye. His voice cracked like a man choking on his own insincerity. Aiden was too busy tapping away on his laptop to even notice, probably finalizing his deployment plan, blissfully unaware he was about to commit war crimes against structured data. Everyone clapped. Lightly. The kind of clap you give when the Zoom mic is muted and you're just trying to look engaged. Someone handed me a farewell card, signed by people who hadn't spoken to me in years. "I'll miss your spreadsheets," one read. "Good luck with your journey," scribbled another with the emotional depth of a weather report. I smiled. I ate half a cupcake. Vanilla, dry as drywall and frosted with something that tasted like sadness and Crisco. Then I cleaned out my desk. No job, no severance, no future promises. Just 15 years of blood, sweat, and undocumented process logic shoved into a banker's box and a tight smile that refused to crack. Taped beneath my laptop was what really mattered, a matte black USB drive. My personal arc. It held the real backups, the undocumented flows, the off-the-books admin scripts, snapshots of the infrastructure before Aiden's toddler hands got on it. It was like watching a surgeon hand their scalpel to a raccoon. Before I left, I made one last stop at the server closet, not for sabotage, just closure. I touched the old patch panel. Portside cabled myself back when the office still had fax machines. I whispered goodbye to the server. I once rebooted manually at 3 a.m. after an earthquake fried the UPS. The memories didn't fight to stay, they just nodded silently and let me go. As I passed the marketing department, I saw a framed poster with some inspirational quote about change being opportunity. I'd seen that same quote in a dentist's office. It had cavities then, too. Near the door, I bumped into Rachel, my only real ally left. Smart, quiet, way too competent to still be in QA. She hugged me quick like a secret. Then she leaned in and whispered something so soft it tickled my ear. I'll keep you posted. I pulled back, raised an eyebrow. She just winked and walked away, blending back into the fluorescent jungle like a spy in a cubicle farm. And with that, I walked out into the parking lot under a gray Ohio sky that matched my inbox, empty. The air was cold, clean, honest. I got in my car, shut the door, and sat in silence for a minute. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from relief, from the energy of a chapter violently closed. They thought they'd offloaded a fossil, a relic, but fossils are just bones waiting to be unearthed by someone who knows their value. And this fossil had just left a blueprint for disaster sitting neatly on a shared drive, labeled Approved Handover Final. 3 weeks out, and I'd finally stopped waking up at 6 a.m. in a cold sweat, thinking I'd missed a stand-up meeting. No more inbox fire drills. No more polite circling back emails from people who couldn't code a loop if it bit them in the ass. Just peace, coffee that didn't taste like despair, and a sad little pile of unused business casual gathering dust in my closet. And yet, I couldn't stop checking LinkedIn. At first, it was just habit, muscle memory. Then curiosity turned into surveillance. I started watching for updates like a hawk in bifocals. That's where I saw it. Aiden had been promoted. Lead CRM optimization engineer, his headline now boasted. The kid barely knew the difference between a hotfix and a hostage situation. But there he was, basking in digital applause from people who think agile is a personality trait. Worse, he'd posted a status. Excited to roll out our first major infrastructure update this week. Big things coming. Hash next gen CRM hash level up my stomach sank. That update? That wasn't just a rollout. That was the rollout. The one built on a foundation of papier-mâché and hubris. The one I'd laid breadcrumbs for like a damn fairy tale, which fattening up Hansel and Gretel for a schema-based oven. Cue Rachel. She hadn't said much since I left, but every few days I'd get a little digital breadcrumb. An email titled FYI. A forwarded Slack screenshot. No commentary. No trail. Just cold, hard glimpses behind enemy lines. And then, one morning it came. A screenshot of Aiden's Slack post to the internal dev channel. Pushing the schema, streamlining this weekend. Using the process map from the final 2 doc Mary trained me on seems like the most efficient route. I'll patch the deprecated triggers once we're live. The attachment? My old landmine. Deploy trigger sequence 7C archive docx. I stared at the screen, blood turning to ice. My coffee went untouched. I couldn't tell if I wanted to laugh, scream, or send him a fruit basket with a ticking clock in it. I'd built that path like a roach motel. Clean on the surface, poison underneath. But a lot can go wrong in sabotage. Too much damage and they trace it back. Too little and you don't get the fireworks. I needed this to hit just right, and I wasn't sure anymore if it would. I paced, checked my own notes, reviewed the chain reaction I'd seeded, the way the auto-mapping logic would misfire when exposed to the newer database wrappers, silent corruption that would slither through contact records, misaligning IDs, dropping email logs, overriding timestamps like a worm chewing through the spine of the company's history. It was brilliant, ruthless, but also dangerous. If it collapsed too hard, they might burn the whole system to the ground before realizing what had gone wrong. Had I gone too far? Had I misjudged the dominoes? Had I underestimated him? No, I reminded myself. Aiden was confident. Confidence wasn't competence. He wasn't the type to test edge cases. He was the type to deploy on a Friday and brag about it at brunch. Still, I couldn't shake the pulse behind my eyes. What if they had some backup failsafe I didn't know about? What if someone more senior stepped in and caught the inconsistencies? What if Rachel's whispers had been intercepted? I didn't know, but I did know one thing. It was happening this weekend. The trap was set. The player was in position. And I, the ghost of systems past, was about to see if my little digital IED would detonate. Tick, tock. Friday night came like a calm before a biblical flood. I imagined the office bathed in that eerie corporate fluorescence. Aiden hunched over his terminal like a gamer about to click New Game Plus on expert mode. He probably had hype music playing, maybe something with a drop. Probably wore his commit early, commit often t-shirt. somewhere. Todd was sipping Merlot, thinking he'd saved $250,000 by replacing me with his VP's golden retriever in human skin. I poured myself a glass of wine, boxed, classy, and watched the clock strike 7:03 p.m. Deployment hour. Then I waited. Monday morning, 8:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. Rachel's name. One-word text, fire. I opened my laptop and sipped my coffee slowly, ceremonially, like I was watching the opening scene of a thriller I'd written and cast myself in. I didn't even have to guess what had happened, I knew. But then the details started trickling in like blood under a locked door. Client portals were down across the board, not just laggy. Dead, 502s everywhere. The CRM couldn't render contact histories. Entire customer records had been replaced, merged, or just vanished. Email logs were backward dated, action fields missing. Some reps logged in to find their pipelines populated with names from other clients. HIPAA violations were flying like mosquitoes in July. One of the sales engineers posted to Slack, "Who approved this push? I just lost all of ShawTech's Q2 activity. I have to present in 45 minutes." Another chimed in, "Our billing sync is corrupt. I just refunded $23K to a ghost account." By 10 a.m., someone finally yelled the question I'd been waiting for: who documented this flow? And there it was. A screenshot from the internal investigation log. Update path final 2. DocX initial trainer, M. Halperin implementer. A write my name bold as brass attached to the most cursed deployment since the healthcare gov launch, but only in the context of training. Not execution, not approval, not strategy. Just the relic, the ghost. The mentor who handed the keys to the shiny new king. I wasn't even in the company anymore. But suddenly, my fingerprints were everywhere and nowhere at the same time. I was Schrödinger's scapegoat, visible but untouchable. Meanwhile, clients were losing their minds. ShawTech, Green Ridge Solar, Eldra Pharmaceuticals, big ones, all calling, all threatening breach of contract lawsuits. One forwarded me a clip of an account manager on a Zoom call trying not to cry as she explained to a client that yes, their 6 years of interaction history were currently unavailable. Aiden? Silent. Rachel's next message told me he'd been pulled into an emergency incident review with 3 directors, a lawyer, and an IT forensic specialist. Apparently, he'd walked in with the confidence of a man about to be knighted and walked out pale as drywall. They were digging hard, but all roads kept leading to one thing: the deployment map he selected. The deprecated flow he bragged about streamlining. The trigger sequence he thought would modernize the system. And through it all, I sat there, sipping my coffee, watching the digital smoke rise. Not joyful, not giddy, just satisfied. A dark, molten satisfaction that warmed my bones. The dominoes were falling. The house was on fire. And somewhere in the chaos, little USB sat in my drawer, untouched, intact, and just waiting to become priceless. The email came Tuesday morning. Subject line, urgent. Request for immediate consultation from a company address I hadn't seen in weeks. One of the senior VPs who once praised Aiden's disruptive potential like he was pitching a TEDx talk. Now his tone had all the confidence of a man clinging to a cliff with a spaghetti noodle. I didn't open it right away. I let it marinate in my inbox for a good 2 hours while I walked my dog and treated myself to the kind of breakfast that doesn't come out of a vending machine. When I finally replied, it was brief, happy to help. My consulting rate is $475/HR. Non-negotiable. Per paid retainer, $15,000. Additional terms to follow. 10 minutes later, I had a response. Agreed. Please send contract. Oh, I sent the contract. Page 1, standard consultant terms. Page 2, clause that stripped me of any and all liability for actions performed post-employment. Page 3, full irrevocable ownership rights to the original documentation I had created, maintained, or modified, marked retroactive. Page 4, mandatory board-level review of my termination, to be included in the company's HR compliance audit. They signed it within the hour. Panic, it turns out, is an excellent lubricant for red tape. I walked back into that building the next morning like a ghost from a legend. Same blazer they saw me leave in, same heels, but this time my badge said consultant and everyone suddenly remembered how to make eye contact. Rachel met me in the elevator. No words, just that sharp, smug smirk we'd mastered over years of watching fools get promoted and heroes get cut. Todd, nowhere to be seen. According to Rachel, he was on leave pending investigation. Apparently, the board was not thrilled to discover the replacement he'd fast-tracked had burned down client trust, compromised sensitive data, and cost them 3 annual contracts, all within 72 hours. Rumor was they'd subpoenaed his Slack messages. I got to work. First thing I noticed, the system was hobbling along on my backups. The documentation I'd kept privately on that USB. It already uploaded it to the server, slapped a new name on the directory, Core Config Restoration v2, and were treating it like sacred text. No attribution, of course. Just quiet desperation, reverent mouse clicks, and zero idea what half of it actually did. During the post-mortem call, one of the directors asked me without irony, why wasn't this schema standard used previously? I smiled. It was. Just didn't want to pay for the hands that understood it. I watched the color drain from faces in real time. Aiden was nowhere in sight. Last I heard, he'd been reassigned to special projects, which is HR code for we locked him in a conference room with no Wi-Fi until legal clears the wreckage. As I wrapped up the first phase of the restoration, someone asked me how I managed to bring things back so fast. Simple, I said, without looking up. I already knew where the bodies were buried. I buried them. No one laughed, they just nodded, and signed another retainer extension. The boardroom looked exactly as I remembered it: gray walls, off-brand Nespresso pods, chairs that squeaked when someone with authority shifted uncomfortably. Only now, I wasn't sitting on the far end with my hands folded like a school kid waiting to be graded. I walked in wearing the same navy blue suit they let me go in, like armor pulled from the back of the closet, and I set my laptop on the table like a priest laying down a holy book. The silence was thick. 3 board members, one trembling IT director, one very pale senior VP, no Todd. His name was mentioned only once, no longer with the company. I offered no condolences. I clicked through the slides. Schema repairs, restore points, temporary rollback plans, contingency recommendations. No one interrupted. No one breathed too loudly. They were all listening now. The woman who had been too legacy was now their lifeline. Estimated time to restore primary CRM structure? One of them asked. I tapped the spacebar. 3 hours if I get full access to the backup directory you pulled from my documentation. The one labeled Core Config Restoration V2, that's mine, all of it. And as per the consulting contract, any further use requires a licensing agreement. Retroactive. Indexed, you could hear the collective gulp travel across the table like thunder rolling over a cornfield. But it's your own documentation, one VP tried, voice brittle. No, I said calmly. It was my documentation. Now it's an asset, my asset. And if you want your client data back by COB today, you'll sign the addendum that legal has already reviewed. They signed. Of course they signed. I finished the restoration in 2 hours and 51 minutes, left the system running smoother than it had in years, flagged a few corrupted entries for Rachel to manually clean, and left behind a checklist that could guide even a code-illiterate squirrel through weekly integrity checks. When I stood up to leave, I said nothing. Just closed the laptop, packed my things, nodded to the room. The new CTO, who looked young enough to still believe in work-life balance, started to say, "Thank why," but I was already walking out. The next morning, a Slack leak hit my inbox from Rachel. Aiden Wright has been let go effective immediately. Please direct all deployment queries to systems consulting until further notice. Quiet, no fanfare, no party, just purged like a bad registry entry. I drafted my last email on company letterhead. Short, sweet. Subject, restoration complete, you're welcome. Invoice attached, then I booked a vacation. A solo cabin in the mountains, no Wi-Fi, no Slack, no inbox, just trees, firewood, and a bottle of wine that cost more than Aiden's keyboard. Before I shut my laptop, I dragged one final file to the trash, final 2, docx. I watched the progress bar crawl, then I smiled and clicked delete permanently. Big thanks for watching, you sneaky seniors. Subscribe to keep the coffee pot brewing revenge. Your ex-colleagues won't know what hit 'em.